Justice Amy Coney Barrett thought a golden-sealed subpoena could break Jasmine Crockett, but it wasn't justice, it was an ambush. Inside the federal chamber, Barrett sneered, humiliated, and finally ordered her dragged out without cause. Then within just 48 hours, the leaked recordings detonated secret collusion, raw abuse of power, a judge caught red-handed. How did one woman in only 3 days bring America's highest judge crashing to her knees? Stay with us, this is a story worth every second of your time. The envelope on Jasmine Crockett's desk looked less like paper and more like a threat. Heavy sealed in gold, it carried weight before she even opened it. Her eyes froze on the name inside, Justice Amy Coney Barrett, a Supreme Court justice calling her to testify. That wasn't law, it was intimidation. The air tightened, the room darker with every second she read. Suspicion hit harder than fear. Why, Barrett? Why now? This wasn't about truth, it was a setup. A justice stepping into a political hearing wasn't oversight, it was control. The seal on the page wasn't ceremony, it was a warning. They wanted her cornered, silenced, humiliated. Jasmine pressed the subpoena flat against her desk, her pulse steadying into defiance. Fear clawed for space, but resolve slammed it down. They weren't calling her to speak, they were dragging her to break. She straightened her shoulders, jaw tight, eyes hard. "This is their game," she whispered, voice sharp as steel. "Then I'll play it, but I won't bow." It wasn't hesitation. It was a vow. Whatever trap Barrett had built, Jasmine would face it head-on, unbroken. The vow still echoed in her chest when the chamber doors creaked open, dragging the tension into something colder, sharper. Justice Amy Coney Barrett entered like a shadow draped in robes, her heels striking the marble floor with measured precision. She didn't sit down before speaking, her voice cutting the air like a blade. "We are not here to listen to cheap political whining," she declared, each word dripping with disdain. The insult was deliberate, aimed straight at Jasmine, branding her as nothing more than a loud distraction. A low murmur rippled through the gallery, anger, disbelief, and a rush of unease. Jasmine's eyes locked on Barrett, calm but unyielding. She didn't flinch, didn't shift in her seat, letting the silence carry her defiance. Then her voice came firm and measured. "If you want the truth, I'll give it. But if you want a performance, it won't be from me." The words landed with a weight that cut through the room like gunfire in the still air. The gallery froze, even the court officers pausing, sensing that something explosive had just been set in motion. For a breathless moment, the entire chamber stood suspended between power and defiance. No gavel strike, no shuffle of papers, not even a cough broke the silence. What had started as a routine proceeding was now war declared in plain sight. And everyone present knew they weren't about to witness a hearing. They were about to witness a battle. The silence from Jasmine's first standoff still clung to the chamber when Barrett leaned forward, her eyes narrowing as if sharpening a blade. She asked with a smooth but pointed tone, "Congresswoman, do you contend this court has no authority to examine your prior political statements?" The question was a trap, irrelevant to the case, designed only to drag Jasmine's reputation into the mud. The words slid across the room, drawing a few curious glances from the gallery. It wasn't oversight, it was theater. Barrett didn't wait for an answer before twisting the knife. Her lips curled into a thin smile, and she added with cutting disdain, "Perhaps Mrs. Crockett should relearn the basics of law. You are not here to give lectures." The insult was deliberate, the tone dripping with contempt, meant to shrink Jasmine into the role of a chastised novice. The gallery stirred, whispers rising like static, as though everyone was waiting to see if Jasmine would fold under the weight of the gavel. But Jasmine didn't fold. She straightened in her chair, eyes locked on Barrett with unshaken resolve. Her voice came fast, clear, and surgical. "Article 1, Yarn, Section 8 of the Constitution grants this body oversight, and I was summoned under that authority. The question you just asked has no standing here. It's theatrics, not law." She didn't touch her notes, didn't falter, each word ringing like iron against marble. She wasn't quoting from memory, she was wielding the Constitution like a blade. The shift in the room was immediate. Barrett's jaw tightened, her polished confidence flickering into visible frustration. The prosecutor at her side shuffled his papers, suddenly thrown off balance, the rhythm of their attack broken. A few gasps slipped through the gallery, the kind that came when witnesses realized they had just seen power cracked, if only for a second. It wasn't just a rebuttal, It was a counterattack, precise and devastating. For the first time, the control Barrett thought she owned slipped away. Jasmine hadn't merely defended herself, she had turned the bench's own weapon back against it. The hearing no longer felt like a stage for humiliation. It felt like a duel. And Jasmine Crockett had just drawn first blood. Under the cold fluorescence of the hearing chamber, the tension only thickened. Jasmine's constitutional rebuttal had landed hard, but it didn't end. The ambush only shifted its form. Barrett's expression didn't change much, but her eyes narrowed with precision, then flicked toward the prosecution table. A silent nod. A signal. And within seconds, the trap morphed into something far more vicious. The prosecutor stood up too quickly. He didn't walk, he advanced. With the flair of a man about to deliver a knockout blow, he tapped his finger against a remote. The lights dimmed slightly as a large monitor lit up behind Jasmine. On screen appeared a heavily edited clip, grainy, jerky, clearly cut and stitched like a weapon. Jasmine's voice filled the room, but not with her message. When justice fails, sometimes the streets have to speak. The screen cut. Then, I don't trust any system that silences the angry. Another cut. And then, if the law won't listen, then it deserves to be challenged. Taken apart out of context, they sounded incendiary, reckless, even dangerous. But Jasmine knew exactly where those quotes had come from. They were from a speech she had delivered at a university town hall 2 years ago after the shooting of an unarmed teenager. The full speech had been a passionate plea for peaceful protest, for nonviolent resistance, for channeling outrage into policy reform. But here it had been carved into a crude weapon. Before the gallery could process what they were seeing, Barrett leaned in, her voice sharpened to a dagger's point. It's hard to believe someone with a record like this sits in Congress. The insult rang like a slap across the chamber. It wasn't just condescension, it was calculated humiliation. Barrett wasn't questioning Jasmine's logic or her conduct. She was attacking her very legitimacy. The audience murmured, uncertain whether to recoil or lean in closer. Every camera in the room panned to Jasmine, waiting for the first crack in her composure. But there wasn't one. Jasmine didn't blink, didn't flinch. Her hands moved slowly, deliberately, as she reached beneath her testimony binder and pulled out a separate manila folder, one she had brought for exactly this kind of ambush. She stood not to plead, but to strike back. She held up the document and said, voice steady and cutting, "If you want the truth, I have it. But if you only want theater, don't drag me into a script built on lies." The room stilled. She handed the folder to the court officer. A new video loaded. This time the footage wasn't fragmented or slashed apart. It was her full town hall speech recorded by a student on a phone, time-stamped, unedited. And the quotes, they were still there, but now so was the context. When justice fails, sometimes the streets have to speak not with violence, but with unity. Peaceful protest is a right, not a threat. I don't trust any system that silences the angry because it's not built to listen. That's why we write bills, not burn buildings. If the law won't listen, then it deserves to be challenged in court and Congress and at the ballot box. That's democracy. The difference was night and day, and the reaction in the room was immediate. Audible gasps. Some heads turned toward Barrett. Others just stared at the screen, jaws, clenched eyes wide. Jasmine hadn't just defended herself, she had flipped the entire attack. Barrett's face hardened. The prosecutor froze, his mouth slightly open, as if the script he'd memorized had just burst into flames. The gallery erupted into hushed chaos like a courtroom, watching not a witness, but a reversal of power in real time. This wasn't a moment, it was a reckoning. And for the first time since the hearing began, Barrett didn't speak. The final seconds of Jasmine's uncut footage still hung in the air, like a verdict louder than any gavel. Every word she'd said, restored in full, unmanipulated, had already landed. And while the crowd buzzed in disbelief, Barrett sat frozen behind the bench, her grip tightening on the edge of the table, as if sheer force could pull her power back into place. The silence didn't serve her anymore. It betrayed her. Her eyes, cold, calculating, now twitched with something far less controlled. Rage, humiliation, the kind of fury that doesn't announce itself with logic, but explodes when truth hits harder than expected. She didn't lean forward this time, she stood. The gavel trembled in her right hand, and her voice, once sharp with judicial precision, now cracked with contempt. Mrs. Crockett, your arrogance pollutes this room. The public doesn't need to hear lectures from someone so undisciplined. There was no legal framing, no pretense of professionalism. It wasn't a ruling, it was retaliation. Barrett had abandoned the mask of impartiality and gone straight for the throat. The attack wasn't on Jasmine's argument, but on her character, her voice, her right to stand there at all. It was personal, and everyone in the room felt it. But Jasmine didn't shrink, not even a breath. She didn't respond with anger. She responded with something colder, sharper. Her posture stayed firm, back straight, gaze unwavering, as she stood tall, not as a defendant, but as a witness refusing to fold under force. Her voice was calm, but her words hit like a lightning strike. The public needs to know when justice is manipulated to silence voices. And this room right now is proving exactly that. The blow landed deeper than anyone expected. There was no shouting match, no courtroom chaos, just pure surgical confrontation, a truth too direct to deflect. Cameras locked in on Barrett's face, catching the flash of panic beneath the anger. The gavel in her hand didn't move. It just stayed there, clenched so tight her knuckles turned bone white. Gasps rippled across the gallery, not for drama, but because they knew. They had just witnessed something shift. The power in the room, once anchored behind the bench, was now pouring into the woman who had just spoken with nothing but the truth. Barrett's expression faltered just for a breath, but it was enough. Enough to break the illusion, enough to show that for the first time in the entire hearing, the judge wasn't in control. She was on edge. And Jasmine Crockett had put her there not by shouting, but by refusing to be silenced. That moment, raw, unflinching, wasn't just a turning point. It was a crack in the foundation. And the whole room felt the tremor. The words Jasmine had just delivered were still echoing across the marble chamber, hanging in the air like smoke after a blast. Barrett sat rigid behind the bench. Her authority bruised her grip on control, slipping fast. Her jaw tensed, her lips pressed into a hard, pale line. Then the composure snapped. With a fury sharpened by humiliation, Barrett rose from her seat and slammed the gavel down with brutal force. Once, then again. The sound cracked like thunder across the room. Her voice, usually measured and clipped, now roared with unfiltered rage. Enough, this witness is in contempt of court. Remove her immediately. The gallery froze. You could hear nothing but the ringing of her words, still vibrating off the stone walls. Then, slow and unsure, two court officers stepped forward. Their boots thudded across the floor with grim finality, as if justice itself had been replaced by force. The cameras swung toward them, capturing the exact moment when law began to bend into spectacle. But Jasmine didn't move. She didn't shrink, didn't plead, didn't blink. Her face was calm, almost unnaturally, so like someone who had already accepted what was coming and refused to give it the satisfaction of fear. As the officers drew closer, hands hovering just inches from her arms, she rose to her feet, slow and deliberate. Her voice didn't shout. It didn't tremble. It came out like steel. I am not in contempt of this court. I am refusing to be in contempt of justice. And if I have to say that in chains, I'll say it again. The room erupted not into chaos, but into something more powerful: disbelief and awe. Gasps spilled from the gallery like aftershocks. Even the officers stopped for a heartbeat, frozen between command and conscience. The moment was seared into the cameras, captured from every angle. Jasmine standing tall, fearless, unflinching, as the weight of the system tried to crush her in real time. Barrett stood motionless, her gavel still raised, but now meaningless, her face stiff as granite. For the first time since the hearing began, the symbol of power no longer looked like power. It looked shaken. And Jasmine, unarmed, outnumbered, but not undone, had just proven something that couldn't be erased. She might be silenced, but she would never be small. The echo of Barrett's gavel was still trembling in the marble when Jasmine disappeared behind the chamber doors, flanked by two court officers. She hadn't been handcuffed. She hadn't been touched roughly. But the weight of what had just happened, the symbolism of it, was unmistakable. A sitting congresswoman had been ordered out not for disorder, not for shouting, not for defiance, but for speaking the truth calmly under oath. And now she was gone from the room. But she had never been louder. Her lead attorney, who had sat through the entire exchange with the silent intensity of someone waiting for a trigger, didn't wait long. With the quiet precision of a man who knew exactly what he was doing, he opened his case, pulled out a small black USB drive, and walked it to the press pool. No theatrics, no statement, just one handwritten note taped to the side, full courtroom feed. No edits. It spread faster than anyone could have predicted. Within minutes, media outlets had the file. By the end of the hour, it was being aired on live news. And what the public saw wasn't interpretation or opinion, it was reality captured in real time. The footage began with routine legal procedure, but it didn't stay there for long. Barrett's tone grew sharper with every exchange, her control slipping word by word. Viewers saw it unfold. They heard it. "Mrs. Crockett, your arrogance pollutes this room." They watched her expression twist from superiority into contempt. But the breaking point, the moment that tore through the nation, wasn't what Jasmine said. It was what Barrett did next. She didn't pause. She didn't offer a legal warning. She didn't cite a statute or rule. She simply stood, raised her voice, and ordered, "Remove her immediately." It was clear. It was public. And it was utterly unprovoked. Jasmine had been composed, unshaken. Her crime was refusing to fold under pressure. And now everyone knew it. The footage was damning, not because it was dramatic, but because it was quiet. Because it showed without doubt a Supreme Court justice using her bench not to uphold order, but to crush dissent. It showed Barrett moving not with legal purpose, but with personal anger. And it showed Jasmine being punished not for behavior, but for presence, for daring to sit in that chair and speak. Reaction was immediate and visceral. Legal experts didn't hold back. One former federal judge watching the footage live took off his glasses and said bluntly on national television, "That's not contempt of court, that's contempt for truth." Law school deans issued open letters within the hour condemning what they described as unlawful retaliation cloaked in process. Even longtime defenders of judicial independence looked shaken, forced to reckon with what was now playing on every screen across the country. It was no longer a matter of courtroom decorum or political disagreement. This was something deeper. What the world had just seen wasn't Jasmine Crockett out of control. It was Amy Coney Barrett out of bounds. And with the full hearing now exposed, raw and uncut, the verdict from the public was already forming. Jasmine had been silenced without cause, and Barrett had crossed a line no robe could hide. The third day arrived with a stillness that didn't belong to any courtroom. An unnatural quiet, heavy and coiled like a breath being held across an entire city. The hearings had already gone viral, already drawn blood, but no one knew what was coming next. No one except Jasmine Crockett. When she stepped into the chamber that morning, the air shifted. She didn't just walk in. She returned calm, composed, unshaken by the spectacle of her own forced removal. Cameras clicked the moment she crossed the threshold, but Jasmine didn't look at them. She didn't need to. All eyes were already on her, including those that tried not to be, especially Barrett's. Barrett sat high on the bench, cloaked in black, but it was clear she hadn't slept. Her stare was stiff, vacant, not focused on Jasmine, but just past her like someone trying not to see the storm she knew was about to hit. The prosecutor at her side glanced downward, flipping pages with a hand that visibly trembled. Neither of them knew exactly what Jasmine had, but they both knew this. Whatever it was, it had changed the energy in the room. Jasmine approached the witness table with purpose. She carried no laptop, no legal pad, only a single manila folder, thick unmarked, clutched tightly in her hand like a weapon concealed in plain sight. She waited for silence. She didn't have to wait long. Then she stood. Her voice was low, steady, but sharpened with the weight of truth. She didn't rush. She didn't posture. She simply raised the folder into view and spoke with terrifying precision. "This isn't just abuse of power. This is collusion." Justice was bartered behind closed doors. The room didn't react immediately. For half a second, the words just floated there, too heavy, too sharp, too direct to be absorbed all at once. Then the shock hit. A ripple of audible gasps surged through the crowd. A law clerk in the back dropped her pen. A bailiff shifted his stance. On the monitors behind Jasmine, the evidence appeared line by line. It was a chain of internal messages, emails from Barrett's own judicial assistant, time-stamped 2 days before the hearing. The language was plain undeniable. Phrases like "Judge Barrett requests alignment with prosecution on tone," "agree to limit scope of Crockett's responses," and "ensure cross-examination pivots early if she deflects." And the worst one highlighted in red on the main screen: she cannot be allowed to control tempo. Judge wants her contained. That sentence didn't need interpretation. It didn't belong in a courtroom. It didn't belong anywhere near a judge sworn to impartiality. It was the smoking gun. Jasmine didn't add anything. She didn't have to. The evidence said everything. Barrett had pre-coordinated with the prosecution, discussed strategy in private, and tried to engineer the hearing like a show trial, a violation of judicial independence so blatant, so reckless, it stunned the room into paralysis. Barrett sat frozen. Her hands clutched the edge of the bench knuckles, white against wood. Her lips parted slightly as if searching for a word, but nothing came. No denial, no clarification, only silence, and in that silence, guilt poured through every crack of her expression. The courtroom just 24 hours earlier, her kingdom was now staring up at her like she was the one on trial. Her authority, once untouchable, was dissolving beneath the weight of her own decisions. And Jasmine Crockett, standing with nothing but truth in her hand, had just dealt the blow that no robe could deflect. This wasn't just a rebuttal, it was a reckoning. And it was absolute. But the silence didn't last long. Within hours of Jasmine's revelation, the fallout ignited like dry brush in a wildfire. Washington was no longer trying to process what happened, it was scrambling to contain it. Because what Jasmine had exposed wasn't just judicial misconduct, it was a betrayal of the Constitution by one of its most protected figures. And by morning, the entire federal system was shaking. The Federal Oversight Council convened in an emergency session, a rare televised full-panel meeting called in less than 12 hours. No delays, no backdoor stalling. The session was packed. Senators, legal watchdogs, former clerks, and constitutional scholars flooded into the chamber like witnesses to a political funeral. On the table, two motions. One to invalidate the arrest warrant for Jasmine Crockett, and the second to open an ethics investigation into Justice Amy Coney Barrett. The vote was swift, unanimous. Not a single voice defended the warrant. This wasn't law enforcement, declared one senior senator. This was retaliation, pure and simple. And when the decision passed, a single sentence was broadcast across America like a warning bell. The warrant for Jasmine Crockett is hereby revoked. Immediate federal investigation into Justice Barrett is authorized. Social media erupted, but it wasn't chaos, it was clarity. Hashtags that once smeared Jasmine's name vanished under the flood of rage and vindication. Millions shared the footage of her calm, surgical takedown. Analysts who once speculated she'd overplayed her hand were now praising her as the only one with the guts to call out the system from within. Meanwhile, the press didn't just turn on Barrett, they devoured her. Editorials across the country dropped their neutrality like dead weight. Barrett betrayed the bench. Justice on sale, the trial that never was. Cable anchors, some previously sympathetic, now lined up to demand her resignation. And when CNN replayed the courtroom footage with the leaked messages scrolling in sync, it hit like a gut punch. Viewers could see it line for line how justice had been choreographed in secret. No explanation could soften it. Then came the silence. Not from Jasmine, from Barrett's allies. Republican senators who once praised her judicial demeanor stopped taking press questions. Legal think tanks that had long upheld her as a model of constitutional conservatism pulled down her portraits from their websites. Her former clerks deleted posts. Panelists who spent years defending her suddenly pivoted to, if these allegations are true. And in politics, that phrase is a death sentence in disguise. Even within the Supreme Court's own ranks, internal tension spilled into public view. Two justices released rare unsigned statements condemning any coordination between bench and prosecution as irreparably corrosive. They didn't name her. They didn't need to. Meanwhile, Barrett did what powerful people often do when cornered: nothing. No press conference, no statement, no apology. She remained cloistered in her chambers while a legal inferno scorched everything around her. But silence only works when no one is looking. And now the whole country was watching. Cameras camped outside her home. Protesters lined the sidewalk not with torches, but with pocket constitutions held in the air. One sign read, "You swore to the people, not to the prosecutors." Another, "We teach kids not to cheat." Why don't we teach judges, Jasmine? Meanwhile, didn't return fire. She didn't need to. The system once weaponized against her was now choking on its own misuse. She gave no speeches, posed for no interviews. Her silence for once spoke louder than any soundbite. And every hour she said nothing, Barrett's isolation deepened. In Congress, things grew colder still. The Judiciary Subcommittee introduced a formal resolution of censure. Two senior Republicans signed it, former allies of Barrett, who had helped fast-track her confirmation years earlier. Their shift sent shockwaves through the party, but they didn't flinch. "We believed she would protect the Constitution," one of them said on the floor. "We were wrong. The damage wasn't just reputational. It was historical." Barrett had in a single week gone from Supreme Court justice to potential federal defendant, from arbiter of law to its most public violator. Public trust in the court dropped by 12% in just 3 days. A polling firm declared it the sharpest nosedive in public confidence since the Nixon era. Legal scholars began openly discussing reforms, mandatory recording of private judicial communications, real-time transparency tools, even impeachment clauses. No topic was too sacred now, and for Barrett there was no script left, no cloak to wrap herself in. Her reputation, once pristine and untouchable, now lay in ruins. Not from a scandal of greed or personal failing, but from a deliberate choice to twist justice in private and hope no one would ever see. But Jasmine saw, and now so did everyone else. The cameras were waiting, the steps of the courthouse still buzzing with reporters, guards, and murmurs suddenly fell into a hush. The federal ruling had cleared Jasmine's name, shattered Barrett's credibility, and rewired the national conversation. But now the final moment belonged to her, and everyone knew it. The crowd didn't blink. They held their breath. Jasmine stepped through the courthouse doors with her head held high, her pace calm but resolute. Her suit still bore the creases of a long, brutal legal war, but she wore it like armor. Flanked by no entourage, no lawyers, no political handlers. She walked alone toward the podium, not to gloat, not to spin, but to say exactly what needed to be said with the weight of a country behind her. She took one breath, looked straight into the sea of cameras, and delivered the line that would ricochet across America. "I was called here to be silent, but I leave to prove when truth speaks, no one can make it bow." The silence cracked. Applause didn't erupt, it detonated. Reporters dropped their mics for a beat. A few veterans of Capitol Hill said later they hadn't seen anything like it since Watergate. And somewhere deep inside a shuttered chamber, Amy Coney Barrett likely felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Jasmine didn't linger. She gave no second quote, no media follow-up, no rehearsed script. She walked off that podium like a soldier, stepping off a battlefield, not because she needed praise, but because she knew the war wasn't just hers. It belonged to every person who had ever been crushed under the weight of a twisted justice system. Within an hour, her words were everywhere, on live streams, in headlines, pinned on protest signs, blasted across TikTok and primetime cable alike. One phrase written in black paint on a white bedsheet outside the Capitol said it all. When truth speaks, no one can make it bow. People weren't just quoting her, they were living it. Students walked out of lectures holding copies of the Constitution. Civil rights groups declared April 22nd Crockett Day a national reminder that courage doesn't come from status, but from refusal. Even moderate lawmakers began citing her speech as the turning point in restoring checks on judicial power. Her message had done what few thought possible. It pierced the noise. Across neighborhoods from Houston to Harlem, murals of Jasmine began appearing overnight, spray-painted raw defiant. In one, she's holding a broken gavel. In another, she's staring down a shadowy figure robed in red. The caption was always the same: truth doesn't bow. And no one needed to ask who painted it. The streets were speaking now. Former skeptics, once dismissive of her fight, began to rethink everything. "I thought she was reckless," admitted one legal pundit on MSNBC. Turns out she was just 10 steps ahead. Public trust in the Supreme Court hit historic lows. But public trust in Jasmine, it soared. Not because she played politics well, but because she never played at all. Meanwhile, Barrett vanished from the public eye. No press statement, no apology, no defense. Even her own allies had stopped answering calls. It was as if the building she once presided over no longer had walls thick enough to protect her from the echo of Jasmine's words. Silence once her weapon had become her prison. And in that silence, a new symbol rose. Jasmine wasn't just a congresswoman anymore. She wasn't just a lawyer or a witness or a whistleblower. She had become a living answer to a question America had been too afraid to ask. What happens when someone refuses to bow not just to power, but to fear itself? The symbolism caught fire. College students printed her quote on graduation caps. Activists stitched it onto jackets. One father in Illinois got it tattooed over a scar from a wrongful arrest decades earlier. And when asked why, he just smiled and said, "Because I've been waiting 40 years to hear someone say that on the record." The story wasn't just one woman against one judge. It had become every citizen against every system that had ever told them to sit down, shut up, or play along. And Jasmine had broken that pattern not with noise, but with precision. Not with chaos, but with calm defiance. She never returned to the courthouse. She didn't need to. Her fight had already moved to the streets, the screens, and the soul of a country, grappling with its own reflection. And as the footage of her final line replayed for the millionth time, it no longer felt like a headline. It felt like a verdict. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.